Asia's front line is shifting to the islands and narrow seas where Japan, the Philippines, and China are now testing each other's resolve. Japan is led today by Prime Minister Santakichi, who has doubled down on fortifying the country's long southwestern island chain, including Yonauni, the nation's westernmost island sitting roughly 110 kilometers from Taiwan. Her government is pushing ahead with plans to deploy new surface-to-air and anti-8 ship missiles there as part of a wider effort to deter China around Taiwan and the East China Sea. In parallel, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has overseen a more assertive maritime posture in the South China Sea, sending Navy and Coast Guard vessels to resupply outposts and challenge what Manila calls unlawful Chinese incursions. Recent incidents have seen Chinese Coast Guard ships use high-pressure water cannons and ramming tactics against Philippine vessels near Tichu Island and other contested features, prompting Manila to harden its stance and deepen security cooperation with the United States. Against that backdrop, here is a 2,500-word journalist-style voiceover script built around this emerging war belt across Asia's front line, where I quote key figures. I preserve their words exactly and highlight only the most important lines. The map of Asia's security crisis is being redrawn. For years, much of the world's attention has focused on the Taiwan Strait and the broader South China Sea. But today, a new arc of tension is taking shape, stretching from Japan's remote islands near Taiwan through the Philippines, exposed northern and western coasts, down into waters where Chinese vessels now operate with growing confidence. This is the story of how Japan is fortifying its islands, how Manila is sending more ships to sea, and how China is tightening its grip across the region, creating what some analysts are calling Asia's new war belt. Japan's westernmost frontier, the island of Yonauni, rises out of the East China Sea, closer to Taiwan than to Tokyo. For generations, it was a quiet fishing and diving destination known for wild horses, rugged cliffs, and underwater ruins. Now, it is on the front line of one of the world's most sensitive flashpoints. Japan's government has already stationed radar and troops there. In recent weeks, officials in Tokyo have moved a step further, confirming plans to deploy surface-to-air missiles to Yonaguni as part of a broader military buildup along the Nancy Island chain. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi has framed the deployment as a defensive move aimed at deterring rather than provoking conflict in response to China's rapid military expansion and its intense activity around Taiwan. In practice, that means transforming Yonauni from a quiet outpost into a heavily monitored and increasingly fortified node in a wider network of bases and sensors. Joint exercises with the United States are already bringing more foreign troops and logistics onto the island. Recent drills saw U.S. Marines offload containers, fuel, and equipment to support Japan's self-defense force operations there, underscoring how closely Washington and Tokyo now coordinate their posture around Taiwan and the East China Sea. From the Japanese government's perspective, this is about closing a dangerous gap. If a crisis erupts over Taiwan, the islands running southwest from Okinawa, including Mako, Ishigaki, and Yonauni, could become both a frontline shield and a launch pad for operations. For years, defense planners have spoken of building a southwestern wall of bases and missile batteries to complicate any Chinese attempt to project power through the Mako Strait and into the Pacific. That wall is now rapidly taking shape. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Sani Takaichi has tied this hardening posture directly to Japan's security and to the stability of the wider region. At recent appearances following the G20 summit, she has argued that Japan must adapt to a more dangerous neighborhood while insisting that Tokyo remains committed to dialogue and crisis management with Beijing. Her government has already signaled it will continue raising defense spending and investing in long-range strike capabilities, even as it faces questions at home about costs and the risk of entanglement in a Taiwan conflict. If Japan's island buildup represents the northern anchor of this emerging belt, the Philippines is fast becoming its southern hinge. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila has shifted decisively away from the hedging approach of the previous administration and towards a more open alignment with the United States and other like-minded partners. That shift is most visible at sea, where Philippine Navy and Coast Guard crews increasingly find themselves nose-to-nose with Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels. Over the last year, footage has emerged of Chinese ships using high-powered water cannons, blocking maneuvers, and even ramming Philippine vessels in contested waters near Thitu Island, known locally as Pagasa, and around other features in the Spratly chain. These tactics have damaged Philippine hulls and sparked outrage in Manila. Philippine officials have condemned what they describe as bullying and dangerous behavior, but they have also vowed not to pull back. At times, the confrontation has gone beyond words. In one particularly serious incident, Chinese ships reportedly fired water cannons and rammed a Philippine government vessel near Tichu, causing structural damage. No one was killed, but Philippine authorities called the incident reckless and provocative, warning that a single miscalculation, a crew member seriously injured or worse, could trigger a much larger crisis. President Marcos has been unusually blunt about the stakes. In an earlier regional security forum, he was asked what might constitute a red line in the South China Sea. He responded that if by a willful act a Filipino, not only serviceman, but even Filipino citizen is killed, that is what I think very, very close to what we define as an act of war, and therefore we will respond accordingly. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President of the Republic of the Philippines, those words reverberated across the region because any Philippine response would not occur in a vacuum. Manila is tied to Washington by a mutual defense treaty, and U.S. officials have repeatedly stated that attacks on Philippine forces and vessels in the South China Sea could invoke American obligations. In recent weeks, that alliance has tightened further. The United States and the Philippines announced a new joint task force Philippines designed to coordinate operations and planning across key areas, including the South China Sea, and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Philippine Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro presented the task force as part of a broader push to reestablish deterrence in the region, signaling that joint patrols, exercises, and basing arrangements are likely to expand on the ground and on the water. That means more Philippine ships at sea, more joint exercises, and more visible signals that Manila is prepared to contest China's expansive maritime claims. In the country's far north, close to Taiwan, Philippine forces have been practicing the defense of island chains that sit astride key sea lanes and air routes. Soldiers have drilled on Batanes, a picturesque set of islands less than 150 kilometers from Taiwan, where they rehearsed scenarios involving an attack on a crucial choke point in the Luzon Strait. Those exercises conducted with U.S. participation highlight how central the Philippines has become to regional planning for any potential conflict involving Taiwan. Further south and west, Philippine Navy and Coast Guard vessels now regularly sail into what Manila calls the West Philippine Sea, not just to resupply Marines stationed on grounded ships and remote outposts, but to assert legal rights under international law. A landmark arbitration ruling in 2016 invalidated China's sweeping nine-line claim, but Beijing has rejected that decision and continues to expand its presence, building artificial islands, runways, and hangars across the Spratly archipelago. From Beijing's standpoint, these moves by Japan and the Philippines, backed by the United States and other partners, are part of a larger effort to contain China's rise. Chinese officials argue that their Coast Guard is enforcing sovereign rights in waters and around islands that China has considered its own for centuries. At the Foreign Ministry's regular briefings, spokespeople have described Japanese and Philippine actions as deliberate provocations. They insist that it is Tokyo and Manila, not Beijing, that are militarizing the region with new bases, missile deployments, and expanded access for U.S. forces. In response to Japan's missile plans on Yonaguni and other islands, Chinese officials have warned that building up offensive capabilities so close to Taiwan and the East China Sea risks destabilizing an already tense environment. State media frequently highlight historical grievances and suggest that Japan's moves are a step away from its post-war pacifist posture, a theme that still resonates with many Chinese citizens. Yet, while the rhetoric is sharp, China has also relied on gradual, persistent pressure at sea, using Coast Guard and maritime militia fleets rather than Navy ships for many of the most sensitive encounters. Video from recent incidents shows white-hulled Chinese Coast Guard vessels cutting across the bows of Philippine boats, spraying water cannons, and in some cases colliding with them. Philippine crews can be seen clinging to rails as their ships lurch in rough seas, while loudspeakers blare competing claims of jurisdiction. These gray zone tactics fall short of open warfare, but steadily change facts on the water, testing how far the Philippines and its allies are prepared to go in response. Overlaying these tensions is a wider strategic contest involving the United States. Washington's latest deployments and agreements are aimed at building what some analysts describe as an anti-naval belt across the Western Pacific, weaving together missile batteries, radar sites, pre-positioned equipment, and hardened airfields from Japan through the Philippines and beyond. A recent investigation described how a narrow Pacific waterway near the Philippines has become central to U.S. plans to constrain China's Navy with American forces deploying anti-ship missiles and Marines training to operate from dispersed island bases. For local communities on these islands, the shift is both economic and existential. In Yonauni, many residents once made their living from fishing, tourism, and small-scale trade. Some welcome the influx of defense spending, construction jobs, and infrastructure that come with a bigger military footprint. Others worry that their home, long on the margins of national politics, could become the first target in any crisis involving Taiwan. On Batanes and other Philippine islands near Taiwan, locals are grappling with similar questions. As more soldiers arrive for exercises and logistics, some residents voice fear that their peaceful communities might in a future conflict find themselves in the line of fire. At the same time, they say Chinese ships already operate uncomfortably close to their waters, raising concerns about livelihoods and safety, even in peacetime. In capitals across the region, diplomats and defense officials insist that they want to avoid war. Japanese leaders stress that their growing military budget is still aimed at defense and that they seek stability through deterrence, not confrontation. Philippine officials say they are asserting rights affirmed under international law, not looking for a fight. Chinese spokespeople argue that it is external powers, especially the United States, that are stirring up trouble and encouraging smaller countries to take reckless steps. Yet every new move, a missile battery on Yonauni, a joint patrol in the South China Sea, a water cannon blast on the high seas, pushes the region closer to a point where miscalculation becomes more likely. In this emerging war belt, the balance between deterrence and escalation is delicate. If Japan's island fortifications and the Philippines' expanded naval presence succeed in convincing Beijing that the costs of aggression are too high, they could help maintain an uneasy peace. But if each side views the other's moves as threats that must be answered in kind, the spiral of action and reaction could become difficult to control. For now, life continues in these frontline communities. On Yonauni, tourists still come to see hammerhead sharks in the winter and to gaze at the distant outline of Taiwan on clear days. In Batanes, fishermen still head out before dawn, navigating waters that are now the subject of intense strategic planning. On the decks of Philippine patrol vessels, sailors still prepare lines and fenders, knowing that the next encounter with a Chinese Coast Guard ship could be moments away. Over all of this hangs a simple but profound question. Can Asia's leaders find a way to manage their rivalries? Or will this chain of islands and seas become the fault line of a future conflict? As Japan fortifies its islands, as Manila sends more ships to sea, and as China tightens its grip on the surrounding waters, the answer will depend not just on military hardware and alliances, but on political choices made in Tokyo, Manila, Beijing, and Washington. The decisions taken now on where to place missiles, how to conduct patrols, when to exercise restraint will determine whether this new belt across Asia becomes a barrier that keeps the peace or the front line of the next great crisis.